Hey guys, Jehuty here, and today we're learning how to deal with Lidia. And yeah, this is an Anti-Lidia guide for beginner and intermediate level of play. You're going to see some clear-cut weaknesses such as stepping and ducking, especially sidestepping to the left. I also have to mention that I'll be referring to catfoot stance 1 as catfoot stance and catfoot stance 2 as reverse catfoot stance, so it's a bit simpler to explain. You can also look into the timestamps to skip to certain places you want to, it's all in the description. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So let's start off with our regular launchers before we get into the counter hit launchers. So our first regular launcher is 3-2. This is a high string that is +2 on block. However, with the last update, it's now easier to duck and launch punish it because the whiff recovery is now longer. As you can see, the move is also very linear, so you can comfortably step it in either direction, preferably left because that's our weak side. Then we have up forward 4. This is our hop kick, and it's also received a change, and what's happened here is that it has more block frames, so you have more time to register that you've blocked this move and punish it with a 13 frame punisher. However, the time is still quite short, so if you're not comfortable with that, go with something quicker, 10 or an 11 frame punish. Then we have forward 3. This move is -14, however, once again, it doesn't have a lot of block frames, so if you're not comfortable with a 14 frame punish to use something quicker, you're going to see a trend of this. Don't worry if you have PTSD, I'm going to mention this move quite a few times in setups and so forth, so don't worry. Then we have this move here. The thing about this move is that it's +8 on block, it's high and has a lot of pushback. It's kind of slow. A higher level of play people can react to this. However, you won't be seeing it that much because of course it's interruptible, being slow, but Lidia can also use a regular forward 4 to mix it up with that move. Don't worry about that move too much. Then we have while rising 2. This is -12. However, it doesn't have a lot of block frames, so keep that in mind. That means that, yeah, you guessed it, go for something faster if you're not comfortable with punishing it. Then we have during sidestepping 4. Now this move is high as well, however it is quite steppable once again, and it doesn't have a lot of range, so you could actually just backdash this. Yeah. Then we have this launchers that come out of stances. So first we have catfoot stance 3. Now this is a high, comes out relatively slow, and it's also a very linear move, so yeah, you can step it to any side quite comfortably. Don't worry too much about this move. Yeah, next up we have during Heaven and Earth 1. Now this move is -6, so it's not a plus frame move like it looks like, and it tracks very well and has a very deceptive animation, like if she's going low. So yeah, you'll have to block this. You could also parry it, however, we'll talk later about the Heaven and Earth stance by itself. You preferably want to interrupt her whilst she's trying to do something out of that stance. Now let's talk about counter hit launchers. The first one is 1-1, so when the second hit lands as a counter hit, it's a launcher. However, the thing is that this move is -11 and a lot of people don't punish it, so Lidia gets away with this a lot of times. So make sure to punish it. It's also a very linear move, so you can comfortably step it, preferably to the left of course. So the rest of our counter hit launchers come out of stances. So first up we have catfoot stance 4. This is a mid, it's +8 on block. However, the move is quite slow, so interruptible, but it's also very linear, so you can comfortably step it to the left or to the right. Yeah, then we have reverse catfoot stance 3. Now this is a high, it's -4. However, this is one of the few moves that actually tracks your weak side, so you can't step it to the left, you have to step it to the right, and it still comes out relatively fast. Then we have during Heaven and Earth 2. Now this is a low that comes out of the stance, and it's -13 on block. It's also quite steppable, but we will get into this stance, we will talk about this stance, so don't worry about that. The last counter hit launcher is during Stalking Wolf 4. This is a low, and it's -12 on block, and once again this move is very linear, so you can also sidestep it, no problemo, to both sides. And that about does it for her launchers and counter hit launchers. So let's quickly talk about ducking some of Lidia's strings. The thing with Lidia is that she has a whole host of strings that are safe on block. And the thing with this is that most of these actually end with a high, meaning that you can duck them and potentially launch punish her for using them. Of course, the thing with strings is that the first or the second hit telegraphs the last hit, right? So it's easier to react. So look at some of these and make sure you burn them into your mind. However, there are other strings she also has access to, which she can actually mix up with a mid-ender. And that is then mostly punishable if you block it. So yeah, at beginner and intermediate level of play, Lidia players will always be using the high variants because they're safe and people don't duck them. However, a good Lidia player will start to pick up that you're doing that, and then they'll start to mix it up with the mids. So don't always duck, sometimes just block regularly. Make sure every time she uses the mid variant you punish her. What will happen is that eventually she'll stop using those strings altogether because she's just scared of what you do. And another mention also goes to this string here, because it has 3 different variants which can come out of it. Mid option, a high option, and a low option. And yeah, she will mix you up well with that, but she will mostly go for the low option because she gets a launcher after that. And yeah, so it's kind of predictable when you get the read on them. Make sure you punish her every time for the mid, but she will mostly go for the low at the beginning and intermediate level. And yeah, you can launch Punisher, duck the high, and then launch Punisher for that. You see, a better Lidia player actually uses the high launcher by itself, kind of like Brian with his quarter circle back 2-4, if I'm not mistaken. Instead of that, he'll just use forward, forward, 4 instead. So that's the same thing here, just keep that in mind. Let's quickly talk about Lidia's approaching tools. She has while running 1, which is a high +7 on block, and then while running 2, which is a mid and is also safe on block at -2. Really only go for the duck here if you have a very good read, because a good Lidia player is going to mix you up with both of these. So be patient, don't necessarily do anything that is unnecessary, especially when you block the high, because she's a +7. If you do anything, you're going to get blown out of the water. As for the mid option, theoretically it is your turn because she's at -2, but it's not by much, so don't do anything really risky. Many people will still attack you after they use this attack, so keep that in mind. So as a last punishing note here, we have this string here. It's actually a 14 frame punisher, however some people like to use it as a move by itself. And yeah, it's been nerfed, so it's now -15, so potentially launch punishable. However, Lidia herself doesn't have a 15 frame launcher. And what you should keep in mind here is that every time your opponent cuts this short, so they don't execute the full string, it's always -10. However, because you're always caught off guard, your punish may not reach them in time. So if that's the case, make sure you always do like a little low poke, like a generic down 4. Make sure to deter them from using this string. So stances. Lidia has 4 stances, and for somebody just learning the matchup, they all look very similar to one another. However, it's really not as bad as, let's say, Hwoarang stances. You will learn how to differentiate them over time, as well as learning here that 2 of those stances can only come out of the other stances, so you can use that to your advantage to differentiate them as well. So first things first is her cat foot stance. The thing about this stance is that I want you to burn the image into your mind, because you need to differentiate it from the other stances. This is primarily one of the stances you're going to meet, and of course this is the approach tool which you can use to get into it. So forward, forward 2, which we tackled before, it can go into the stance, however only upon successfully hitting. Now in the stance itself, you realize that there are a couple of moves we tackled in the launcher section, some plus frame moves, but really strictly speaking, no lows to threaten you with. The only thing which you should maybe take note but rarely comes out is the 2 option. It's -10, so make sure to punish it. However, everything else isn't really that bad, especially when you find out that these moves are very linear, so you can just like sidewalk left all the options. The only somewhat gimmicky thing she has is an unblockable by cancelling it, so she can press back for a back jump and then 1 for an unblockable move, which is a high. So if you know it, you just duck it and then you launch Punisher for it. If you do that twice to her in a match, she'll stop doing it altogether. She wouldn't even attempt it if she's a bit smart. Yeah, and she can also do that same back jump cancel into unblockable from reverse catfoot stance, and that brings us to reverse catfoot stance. Remember to burn in the image of the reverse catfoot stance to make sure you can differentiate it and see it coming. And the thing about this stance is, in my opinion, it's slightly better than the regular catfoot stance. However, it doesn't really have that many plus frame moves. She has some stuff which are safe. The 1+2 option is -10, so make sure to punish it if it comes out. However, once again, these moves are quite linear, not as bad as the regular catfoot stance, but still quite steppable. The only thing you really need to worry about in this stance, and you're going to see this quite often, is the down 4-4 option. What's going to happen is that she's going to sweep you off your feet, and then she can choose to finish the string, but in many cases what she's going to do, she's going to go for the option of forward 4-3, her launcher, and if you try to get up or do a get up kick or in some form, you will get launched. So the only thing you can do is either not get up immediately or maybe roll, so keep that in mind. In many cases, this however is going to come out of a successful move that transitions into the stance. So we have down forward 2 for instance. If it connects successfully, so if it hits, she will transition into the reverse catfoot stance, and then she can use that setup. And the other thing which she can also use to transition into the stance is 1-2-2. Upon successfully hitting the last hit, she will also transition into this stance, so keep that in mind when you're dealing with this stance. So Heaven and Earth for many is a kind of hard stance to deal with because the mid option launches and it tracks to both sides and has somewhat of a deceptive animation. The low launches on counter hit even though it's sidesteppable, and the high option, the 1+2 option, what it does is that even on block, she gets a guaranteed 14 frame move in there. Yes, you heard that right. So yeah, it sounds horrible, but here is the thing. She can only get into Heaven and Earth stance by transitioning from, you guessed it, regular catfoot stance. So this goes to your advantage. So it's even more of a reason to look at the regular catfoot stance, because as soon as you see that and she starts transitioning, then you can actually interrupt her. She has, the quickest thing she has out of that stance is 16 frames. If you have a magic 4, you can counter hit launcher out of that and get a combo out of that. And if your character doesn't have a quick counter hit launcher, what you can also do is you can use a quick mid to keep her in check, so to interrupt her, something like a down forward 1 if your character has one. Yeah, it's definitely your advantage when she tries to go into this stance. And the same thing also applies now for the next stance, which is Pouncing Tiger, Stalking Wolf. The same thing goes for this stance here. It has a couple of options. You can step. The actually only threatening thing out of this stance is the counter hit 4, which is a low counter hit launcher. However, you want to do the same thing just like with Heaven and Earth. She can only transition into this stance coming from reverse catfoot stance. So you just go and look at that stance again to burn it into your mind when she transitions. Then you just can interrupt her with a quick counter hit tool or a quick mid to keep her in check. It's really your advantage when she tries to go into these stances. So if you're a defensive player, she will make her life miserable for you, but you need to train your mind that when you see these other two stances transitioning from the other stances, that you interrupt her. Then all her options fall flat. Maybe you can even get a counter hit launcher out of that. So let's talk about some of Lidia's lows. First up is her down back 3. So this works like a demo man, same for Paul and Noctis. Of course that means it's launch punishable on block and it staggers. However, it has much better range for the clean hit status. So that means you have to be backdashing really for your life to make sure that it doesn't clip you cleanly and then she gets the full damage. Next low is down back 2. This is somewhat like Dragunov's one, however it doesn't force the opponent into crouch, it tracks both ways. However, it doesn't have the best distance, so you could actually also backdash it. So it's minus 14 on block, so keep that in mind. If you have a read, make sure to punch it properly. Now we have down back 4. So this is kind of similar to a move Fakum Ram has. However, this move is one of the few moves that you cannot sidestep to the left. However, you can sidestep it to the right. When you do block it, however, it is minus 13, so punish it accordingly. So the next few strings are variation of the setup we already saw in reverse catfoot stance. And the idea here is that after they sweep you off of your feet, they can launch you a forward 3. Of course, they can choose to finish the stance, but they're not going to do that in many cases. They're really going to try to launch you. So my tip is stay on the ground at first, don't get up immediately. If you want to, you can roll to the side, but anything else, even just simply trying to get up, will launch you, so keep that in mind. There's a similar scenario of the last low here, and that is during full crouch down forward 3. This move is of course launch punishable, it staggers on block, but in many cases if you're knocked by this, the Lidia player is still going to try to go for forward 3 to launch you, because it's the same situation as the prior move. But unlike the other situations, if you immediately press back to get up immediately, the forward 3 will actually in many cases whiff, and then you can actually launch them when you get up whilst they're still recovering, so keep that in mind. Now lastly, I want to briefly talk about Lidia's parries. So the first one is our punch parry. A lot of people are worried about this. It's really not as bad as Leroy's. It needs to be done quite precisely so it doesn't have such a big parry window. It only parries punches, not kicks, not knees, not elbows, only punches. And yeah, it also doesn't have such a damaging follow-up as Leroy's, so it does a total of 38 damage. The next parry is also very situational, down forward 1+2. This works just like Josie's parry, so what it does is that it only parries right hand attacks. So that means if you're using a 2 jab instead of a 1 jab, or an electric or something, this can actually parry that. So if you're getting hit by that often, that means it's maybe time for you to switch to moves that come out of your left hand, so like a 1 jab. So the last form of parry goes to down back 3+4. So when Lidia is executing this move in specific frames, if you use a low attack, she will parry it. However, as you're seeing, it needs to be quite specific with the timing, so it's not really that good of a move. Don't fear this too much unless you're being predictable with your lows. And yeah, it's also very linear, so you can step it comfortably, so don't worry too much about it. So that about does it for my video on how to deal with Lidia. You know the drill by now. If you liked the video, leave a like of course, and really consider subscribing because that helps me the most. Yeah, there are also other stuff on the channel, other anti-character guides like how to deal with Leroy on the channel, and more stuff coming. This is your boy Jehuty, and I'll see you on the next one.